Good Sunday morning, everybody. Welcome. This week, the White House and congressional Republicans put on the full court press for tax reform. President Trump heads to Puerto Rico to survey hurricane damage on Tuesday, and the Trump administration looks for a replacement for former Health Secretary Tom Price. Good morning. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Thanks so much for joining me this morning. This is Sunday Morning Futures. With health care in the rearview mirror now for the time being, President Trump and Republicans are turning their attention to tax reform. How will it affect you, the American taxpayer? The director of the President's National Economic Council, Gary Cohn, will join me live in studio coming up. Also, could tax reform be used to help peel back the Dodd-Frank financial regulation? I'll talk with House Financial Services Committee Chairman Jeb Hensarling of Texas coming up. Then an emotional scene on Capitol Hill this past week. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise returning to Congress for the first time since being shot in June at a baseball practice game. What was the mood like inside that chamber? I'll talk with his fellow Congressman Louis Gohmert as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And Republicans are making their push on tax reform, and after the latest health care failure, the stakes are high. This new plan tries to simplify our complicated tax code, consolidating the number of tax brackets from 7 down to 3, setting individual tax rates at 12%, 25%, and 35%. The president describing it as rocket fuel, quote unquote, for the economy, saying it will deliver a, quote, middle-class miracle. Joining me right now is President Trump's chief economic advisor and the director of the National Economic Council, Gary Cohn. Director Cohn, good to see you.
Maria, it's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. You've got a lot on your plate, I know that. And this tax plan is so important for the economy and for jobs. Can you talk us through what's most important in terms of this plan? What do Americans need to understand?
Absolutely, Marie. But before I do that, let me just stop and hesitate for a second and talk about Puerto Rico for a second.
Sure.
I just want to reiterate how involved the administration continues to be. We've spent the entire weekend, as we have last weekend, working on Puerto Rico, making sure we're out saving lives, sustaining lives, and making sure everyone in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands is taken care of. The United States has gone through extraordinary efforts to deliver goods to the island. Right now, our big challenge is to get those goods delivered to the citizens of the island that need those goods.
It's hard. It's an island. You can't get there, right?
It's hard, and the infrastructure has been destroyed. So we're working full speed ahead. As you know, the president and many of the cabinet members will be there on Tuesday to see what more, if anything, we can do.
Yeah, but let me just say this, because that mayor from San Juan really gave an aggressive and, sort of adamant interview with Geraldo Rivera, and she's angry at the president. I mean, is this politics, or is this really, maybe there could have been more done sooner?
Look, I think when we look at the history of this, the administration has done an extraordinary job of delivering goods and services and people to the island. We started with 4,500 National Guard there. We now have over 10,000 U.S. government people on the island. There are more ships in the harbor full of material, food, medicine, things to build infrastructure than you could imagine. The challenge now is to get them unloaded and distributed around the island.
Well, I know you'll be there. The administration will be there on Tuesday. We'll be watching that. We're going to cover that live, obviously. And the president has been tweeting about it all weekend. Let me ask you about taxes now, because you've released a very important plan, and it's been a detailed plan, but we still don't understand who falls where. So 12%, 25%, 35% of the rates. If I make $200,000, where does that fall? Am I getting taxed 25% or 35%?
So Maria, remember what we did. We released an outline of the plan. And in the plan, as you point out, we really have 4 rates. What people are forgetting is we really enlarged the 0 rate. We doubled the 0 rate. So if you're a family today, you now get the first $24,000 of your income at a 0 rate. You then kick into the 12% rate, then you go to the 25% rate, then you go to the 35% rate. We have not determined the breakpoints for that. We have given the ability to determine the breakpoints to the Senate and the House as they write the legislation. The reason we've done that is because one of the 2 big bright line tests in our tax plan is that we must, and the key word is there, we must have a middle income tax cut when we're done. So we have told the tax writers, set the brakes where you need to set the brakes to make sure that we end up with a middle income tax cut.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. That's what you've been talking about the whole time. You want to cut tax for the middle class. But I want to show you what Andrew Cuomo tweeted this weekend. And, of course, this is the governor of New York, where you've got a lot of tax income levels. And he tweets out this. Under the GOP tax plan, every New Yorker, every New York region will see a tax increase. Is this true?
Well, Andrew tweeted, I completely disagree with that.
He's saying every New York region is going to see taxes go up.
Well, I don't know what he means by every region. I really don't know what he means by that. First of all, we haven't even delivered enough details for him to come to that calculation.
Well, let's talk about the elimination of the state and local income tax deduction. This is something I think that he's referring to. You're talking about tax rates in New York of 10% on a state level. You're talking about property taxes that have been going up and are very significant. So if you eliminate that deduction, that is a tax increase for New Yorkers, right?
It's not necessarily a tax increase. In fact, it's a tax decrease because we're going to replace that with other pieces, what people haven't seen yet. And this is what people have to do. They have to take a look at the plan in its entirety. We're going to elongate the brackets. We may change the brackets. We're going to increase credits quite dramatically. The child care credits, where they phase out, is going to dramatically change. The size of the child care credits is going to change quite dramatically. You know, we keep talking about the deductibility of state and local taxes and how important that is. Let me give you something that is an absolute and is a fact. Under the old tax system, 25% of families actually itemized and took advantage of the state and local tax deduction. So 75% of the families in America did not use the itemized deduction to deduct their state and local taxes.
Yeah, but if you make $200,000 or more, 90% of you use that deduction.
Like I said, it's 25%. We are designing a tax plan for the United States of America. This is the federal tax plan. We are designing a tax plan to deliver middle-income tax relief to Americans.
I feel like you keep getting bullied, though, by the left. We knew that the talking point after you released this plan would be, this is a tax cut for the rich. And I feel like you're constantly on defense, having to defend lower taxes. I saw you in a review the other day, and he kept throwing these gotcha questions at you, and you're there saying, no, this is not a tax cut for the rich. What's wrong with wealth? What's wrong with coming from nothing, working really hard, making money, and achieving success? Why do you have to defend that?
We shouldn't have to defend the American dream. This is America. This is where people come to succeed. This is where people come to earn money. This is where people come with ideas. Look at Silicon Valley. We have Silicon Valley because people can come here with great ideas and build businesses and succeed. This is what makes America great. We want people to succeed, but we want people to pay their fair share of taxes.
Now you sound like a globalist, and that's what they say, that there's one faction in the White House who's the globalists that want higher taxes for the rich, and then there's another faction that just want to cut across the board. Where do you sit?
I want a fair and equitable tax system, one that allows the United States economy to compete on a global basis, and one that is fair and allows middle-class families to keep more of what they earn.
Isn't it true that the top 10% of taxpayers pay 70% of the tax? So if you don't cut taxes on the very people that are paying all the tax, you're not really cutting taxes.
In broad brush terms, that's a relatively true stat.
So there you go. What's the answer then? If you're not cutting taxes on the highest earners, then you're not cutting taxes if they're paying 70% of the tax.
Our objective here is to continue to give middle-class, middle-income families a tax cut. Allow middle-income families to keep more of what they earn. They still are paying taxes. Even though the wealthier people are paying more taxes, middle-income families are still paying taxes. And yes, we do believe as an administration we can have them pay lower taxes.
Are you going to have well, you said you're already at 4 rates because of the zero, and I understand that. Are you going to have another bracket, 44% for the millionaires, 5 million and up? Is that what you're working on right now? Another bracket so that the highest do, in fact, see a higher rate?
We have given the tax writers, both in the House and the Senate, latitude if they need an additional rate to make sure that the tax budget works, that we have given them the ability to put in a fourth rate if they need it. We'd prefer not to have it, but if they need it, they have that ability. That's why when people come out with these definitive statements of what the tax plan is going to do or what the tax plan is not going to do, I find it hard to believe because we don't even know what the tax plan is going to look like in its entirety yet.
So do you think you can get this done by year end?
Absolutely. I'm very convinced that we can get this done by year end.
So where is the debate right now? Is there an alternative to this state and income tax deduction, for example? I know that was supposed to raise $1.25 trillion over 10 years. Can you find that money somewhere else? I mean, if you were to not eliminate that deduction, if you got so much pushback from Republicans as well?
So remember where the House started in the House blueprint was the ones that had the deductibility and the non-deductibility of state and local taxes. We took the House blueprint as we tried as a group of 6 to work together with a plan that would work for everyone. We took the House blueprint and incorporated that into the group of 6. We are very negotiable on a lot of factors in the tax plan. What we're not negotiable on is 2 points. We're not negotiable on whether we end up with a middle income tax cut, not negotiable. What we're not negotiable on is a 20% tax rate for C corporations and a 25% tax rate for pass-through corporations.
That's what I want to talk about next. Let's take a short break. When we come back, I want to zero in on the business tax breaks here, because a lot of people say this is the most important part of this plan. That's going to move the needle on economic growth. When we come back, we'll talk about the corporate rate and others. Follow me on Twitter, @MariaBartiromo, @Sunday Futures. Let us know what you want to hear from Gary Cohn. I'll check Twitter right now. Stay with us as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Back in a moment with Gary Cohn. And we're back talking taxes with the president's top economic advisor, talking about the new Republican tax reform plan. Want to get into the business side of things, Gary, and that, of course, is a corporate rate at 20% is what you've put forth, and a pass-through rate, LLCs, et cetera, at 25%. How'd you come up with these numbers? Why are these the right rates?
Look, Maria, we've spent a lot of time on this. This is a red line test for us where we end up with the corporate rate. The president has spent an enormous amount of time pushing us on where we are in the corporate rate, and this matters enormously to us. It matters because we have to be competitive with the rest of the world. When we look at the rest of the world, the developed world today, the average tax rate for the rest of the developed world is in the low 20s. 22, 23, 24, depending on how
Ireland's at 13%.
Look, I said the average.
I'm just saying.
There's exceptions for every rule.
I know why, companies are moving to Ireland. Right. That's all I'm saying.
We understand that. But we feel like we've got to get below the average of the developed world. 20% gets us below the average of the developed world. And that's why it's a bright line test. We can't go above that because then we get non-competitive with the rest of the world.
If you've got a pass-through business, let's say you own a hardware store on Main Street, whatever, and you're going to get that 25% rate. Is there a risk here that people can game the system? That you're supposed to be paying the 35%, the highest rate, or even higher than that, and you call yourself an LLC? How do you avoid gaming the system?
We have talked a lot about this. There will be quite extensive anti-abuse language in the pass-through definition. So we make sure someone that really is earning 100% wage income that should be taxed as ordinary wage income is not transferred into pass-through income.
You're talking about a repatriation rate as well, which is what? I mean, are you talking about 10% or lower? Is this a one-time charge? You've said $2 trillion plus dollars is overseas. Yeah. You want that money to come back.
We know it's at the high $2 trillion, could be $3 trillion at this point overseas. We are deeming the rate, meaning we are not giving companies the choice. They are going to pay the rate if they have money overseas. That's how we catch up from the worldwide system to the territorial system. We will end up with a bifurcated rate. We will charge you one rate if you have liquid assets offshore. We will charge you a different rate if you've got bricks and mortar and you've turned those earnings into bricks and mortar or investments offshore. We will give you some period of time to pay it, but you will incur the tax liability the minute the tax referendum goes through.
So even if you have property overseas, then the same thing, the brick and mortar.
If you have property, you will owe us the tax over some period of time at a lower rate.
And is that at 10% or lower than that?
It's like I said, we're going to have two separate rates. We're going to have a higher rate for liquid assets, a lower rate for illiquid assets, again, we've given the tax writers in the Senate and the House the ability to adjust those knobs, adjust those numbers. It will be in that 10% range.
How much does the estate tax and the AMT generate? Because I'm wondering if you don't eliminate that state and local deduction, is that a place for wiggle room? Is that an alternative? Because the estate tax is one tax that people might say, okay, well, that is helping the rich. Maybe that's something that you could give on.
Again, Marie, let's talk about the estate tax. Let's talk about the people that get caught in the estate tax. Let's talk about the people that are really against the estate tax. The American Farm Bureau and the small businesses, they're the ones that come out and really advocate the repeal of the estate tax. They are the people that get caught in the estate tax. We want America to be a place where you can have multi-generational family businesses, where you can build a family business and pass it from generation to generation and not be forced to sell your business upon death. Death should not become a taxable event if you're in a small business. That should not become a taxable event if you're a farmer. If you're a farmer, you should be able to pass it on to your families. We know the statistics. Wealthy people can use estate planning and get around the estate tax. So, look, when you're looking at the estate tax as a whole, it really affects family-owned businesses and farmers more than anyone. On the alternative minimum tax, again, it's something that even the IRS tax advocate and a bunch of nonpartisan groups have come out and said, look, this has not worked. What happens with the alternative minimum tax is it was a pretty good concept. It was a good concept to say that everyone should pay their fair share. Again, wealthier taxpayers have hired accountants to figure out how to not pay the alternative minimum tax, where middle-income taxpayers end up paying the vast majority of alternative minimum tax. Good concept, failed execution. So let's get rid of it and simplify the tax code. One of our core principles is to simplify the tax code.
When do you think you're going to have more of these details, like, for example, the specifics on brackets, the level of income, and the debate over the deduction on state and income tax? That's an open debate right now, right?
This is in the hands of the tax writers, both in the House and the Senate. We are confident that we're going to get a tax bill done in this calendar year. To do that, we've got to get out of the House relatively soon. To get out of the House, we're going to have real details. This bill is going to have to be in markup, hopefully, in October.
Yeah. Real quick, before you go, there's a lot of speculation about changes in the White House. Some people think you're going to get this tax reform done, and then you're going to leave. Is there any truth to that you would leave after that?
Maria, I've got a great job. Think of what I'm involved in. We started down a regulatory path, which was our #1 objective. We're starting to have some wins on regulation. We've got a tax path. We're working on taxes. We've got infrastructure to do. The president and I agree on an agenda, and we agree on an agenda to drive this economy to places that people don't think we could be. Think about the fact that we just published a 3.1% GDP for last quarter. People didn't think that was attainable.
Yeah, 3.1% was a great number. Gary, it's good to see you.
Maria, it's great to be here.
We will be watching for sure. Gary Cohn is the Director of Economic Policy at the White House, and we'll be right back. We're talking regulation coming up.
Our prayers have been answered. His bravery and his family's strength have been such an inspiration to this House and to the people it serves. America is grateful for this moment. The chair now proudly asks, for what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
To speak out of order, Mr. Speaker.
Wow. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise made an emotional return to Congress this past Thursday for the first time since he was shot on that Virginia baseball field back in June. The Louisiana congressman also thanked members of both parties for their support during his recovery before casting his first vote since the shooting for a bill that would in part extend tax benefits to hurricane victims. Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert was there to welcome back his colleague, and he joins me now. Congressman, it's good to see you. Wow, that must have been really emotional. Watching it from here, I'm getting the chills. How was it in that room?
Well, it's emotional watching it from here. It was such a moving event because so many of us had prayed so fervently. And I didn't know the president was coming to the hospital that first night. I was there about 10 minutes before he got there. But to stand beside the president and first lady, as the doctor said that night, President was trying to put a happy spin on it. Well, you know, been 13 hours, so looks like this is a good sign. And the doctor said, I put a tremendous amount of blood in him today. I'm going to put a tremendous amount of blood in him tomorrow if he makes it through the night, but we don't know. I'm going to be on pins and needles. To pray so fervently for his recovery and then see him back in the chamber was just overwhelming. And Steve is such a modest guy, but one of the hardest working guys. It's just a triumph of answered prayers and of someone really applying. It's been tremendous amount of work. People don't realize to get to that point where he is taken enormous work in addition to the answered prayers. And a lot of people don't know. I haven't heard this in the media because it was told me privately. Barry Loudermilk, congressman from Georgia, was in a position behind the fence, behind home plate, as the shooter was moving from the third base dugout around toward first, where he was going to be able to shoot fish in a barrel. They were lying on the ground in the dugout, first base dugout, and Barry says, I'm about to be exposed, and I'm looking around. There's no place for me to run, no place to go. And he saw Crystal Griner, a Capitol Police, that was firing, shot in the ankle, and she was trying through tremendous pain to shoot. And he realized, the guy, I'm about to be wide open, exposed. He says a prayer, and he sees David Bailey, Capitol Policeman, at that moment come out from behind his cover, the Suburban. He's completely exposed, yells twice, drop your weapon, drop your weapon. The guy shoots at him twice, and as soon as he says drop your weapon the second time, he fires twice and takes him out. David Bailey, as Steve said in the chamber, saved his life. He is the ultimate hero, and between the efforts of Crystal and David, they saved lots of lives, probably 24 or so of the Republicans out there. And I was also gratified to hear Steny Hoyer of Maryland, Democrat, honorable man, say that this was a hate-filled shooter. And you don't hear people from the left normally say that we had a leftist full of hate shooting, but the president knew that the very day he said there are problems on both sides after Charlottesville, because he had been there when he knew Steve Scalise nearly didn't make it because of the hate of someone on the left. But it's just been an emotional ride, thank God. And Jennifer, Steve's wife, has been amazing. She has been really a testimonial of what people ought to be going through such things.
Well, you're right. There really are a lot of heroes here, and certainly David Bailey and Officer Griner. They really are our heroes, as are all the first responders and police everywhere. But let me ask you, he made this vote. I believe Steve Scalise's last interview was here on this program before that horrible shooting. He goes back, he votes. Now, is he back in terms of voting, and he's going to be doing rehab along with coming into the office?
That's what I understand. He's going to be back, and he's the guy that stood up for me to get me able to cook ribs again for the rest of the members of Congress. It's the one time I leave a good taste in people's mouth. But Steve made that happen, and I said, and Steve said, so when are ribs? And so we chose a day right there on the House floor. I'm going to be cooking and make sure he got some again.
Wow.
I brought some to the hospital and to him and David Bailey, because David, when I said thank you for saving so many of our friends' lives, he said, no, thank you for all the ribs. I mean, what an incredible, modest guy.
What an incredible person.
But
really, it's
true.
But
David, I said, David, did you really go completely uncovered? Barry Loudermilk said, he said, it hit me. I have to make it him or me, and that's when I stepped out, and he said, thank God it was him.
That's incredible. Congressman, let me switch gears while I have you and ask you how you're going to vote on the tax plan. Obviously, there's some pushback here. We were just talking with Gary Cohn. Are you okay with the elimination of the state and local deduction, number one? And what about a higher rate if they come up with another rate for the highest earners in the millionaire camp of up to 37 or 39%? Is that something that you would be okay with?
Yeah, depending on what we did with the other areas. And by the way, I thought Gary Cohn did a good job, and your questions were terrific. But Steve Moore says I have the best description of the corporate tax, and it's accurate. We placed the highest tariff of any industrialized nation on our own products. That's the corporate tax. It's also an insidious tax because who pays the biggest percentage of their income for the corporate tax? Corporations don't pay that. They pass it on to their purchasers, to their customers. And who buys a bigger percentage or pays a bigger percentage of their income? It's the poor and the middle class. So they're the ones that are paying this. It's a straight pass-through tax. When you lower the corporate tax, you're lowering the tariff we put on our goods.
So what about individuals, Congressman? Are you okay with this deduction being eliminated? Are you going to vote yes to that?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, because Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, these billionaires, they never pay the estate tax. They have estate planning to get around it. But my Aunt Lily lost over 2,000 acres of her estate. She was land rich and cash poor. The IRS took every acre. They took everything. And I was there for the estate sale. The family bought what we could to try to keep things in the family. I've seen what the estate sale does to the middle class, to those that have spent 100 years building farmland and they can't pay the tax.
Well, he made that case as well.
Help.
Congressman, it's good to see you, sir. Thanks very much.
Great to see you.
Congressman
Thanks
Louis
so much,
Gohmert
Maria.
joining us. We'll be right back with Jeb Hensarling. Welcome back. As Republicans roll out their new tax reform plan, some of them on Capitol Hill say that the new plan could also help do something the GOP's been after for years, peeling back the Dodd-Frank regulations. Joining me right now is the chairman of the House Committee on Financial Services, Jeb Hensarling of Texas. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Would you like to see a rollback of Dodd-Frank attached to any tax plan?
Oh, I'd like to see it attached to any bill that moves across Congress. So fundamental tax reform is so critical to our economy, but so is regulatory reform. And our Speaker, Paul Ryan, has called the Financial Choice Act, which effectively repeals and replaces Dodd-Frank, the crown jewel of our regulatory efforts. So we've passed it in the House with only one dissenting Republican vote. Unfortunately, we're still awaiting action in the Senate. But I look for any opportunity to advance both tax reform and regulatory reform. We're going to look at the appropriations process. We're looking at what the Senate can do. But it's an important part of releasing capital in our society. And tax reform will be important, but so is regulatory reform.
Yeah, for sure. And already we've seen, as a result of the president's executive orders on regulation, peeling back certain regulations, we're seeing the economy actually respond. And companies, loosen up their purse strings to invest more in durable goods type things and big ticket items. 3.1% GDP this last week. Tell me what else you would like to see in this tax plan. Are you happy with the current form, this framework that the leadership has released?
Well, again, if I could harken back, you're right, 3.1% GDP growth is not by accident. I mean, we've got a president who has already rolled back hundreds of rules, used the Congressional Review Act 14 times, to roll back onerous Obama regulations where it had only been used once. So this president really is poised to be the deregulation president since the most deregulation since President Reagan. With respect to the tax reform plan, I cannot envision a plan that I would not end up supporting. I'm very excited, as is all Republicans, at this prospect of having a fairer, flatter, simpler, more competitive tax code. And by reducing both the C Corp and the pass-through rates on businesses, I think this economy is poised yet again for 3, maybe 3.5% economic growth. So again, this is a framework, this is an outline, but I think they are off to a great, great start.
Well, the Committee for a Responsible Budget says that these tax cuts are going to cost $2.2 trillion. So the question then becomes, how do you pay for it? Do you need this to be revenue neutral? Gary Cohn, who was just with us, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin have said many times that they are expecting growth to pay for this in a big way. Do you think that's achievable?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure there's any time in America's history in the last century where we haven't had fundamental long-term tax reform that hasn't generated both economic growth and more revenues. You can go back to the Reagan tax cuts. There were 3 different tax cuts, and we had 4% sustained economic growth. In 1984, I think it was 7% economic growth. And when President Reagan left office, revenues were 19% higher. You can go back to the Kennedy tax relief. You can go all the way back to the Coolidge tax relief.
Right.
And so what we see is revenue feedback. It's not just theory that I have.
Yeah, it's
economic history.
I was talking with Senator Ted Cruz about this last week, and he points out that in 1984, the GDP was 7.3%, which is like China numbers. I mean, we haven't seen that in so long. We forgot that that's actually achievable living in this 1% and 2% growth world. Infrastructure package. Gary Cohn just told me during the commercial break, actually, that an infrastructure package is ready now. And you can also attach that to a tax plan should you need to do so to get the votes required to pass this thing. What would you like to see? Do you want to just do a clean tax reform package like the framework says now, or do you want to have this unraveling of Dodd-Frank or an infrastructure package attached to it?
Well, the most important thing right now is to get the votes to get the tax reform package done. That's
well, you don't have the votes,
one.
though, on the state and income tax deduction, right?
Well, I don't know that. What I hope is that people will look at what is the difference in take-home pay between a 1.7% GDP economy and a 3 to 3.5% GDP economy. And so I hope that people will look at that, a generous doubling of the standard deduction. There are all types of provisions in this outline that are going to help working families, middle-income families. But the most important aspect of this is a tax reform plan built for economic growth. I hope in some respects people look at the entire painting and not a few brushstrokes in the corner. If you look at the entirety of the plan, I have no doubt, again, based upon economic history, that we are once again capable of 3% plus economic growth. You know, Maria, we've essentially come out of a lost decade from the years of Obamanomics. And so the average middle-income family is probably $14,000 achieving $14,000 less in income than they otherwise would have had we had sustained 3% economic growth. That's what I hope all my colleagues will focus on, and that is the tax plan built for economic growth that will bring jobs back to America, capital back to America, and lead to not just more jobs, but bigger paychecks and greater take-home pay.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? The wages, which haven't moved in so many years. Congressman, it's good to see you, sir. Thanks very much.
Happy to be here.
Jeb Hensarling joining us there. A high-profile departure from the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price resigns. The president asked him to after reports of his use of expensive private jets on the taxpayer dime. Our panel is weighing in on that as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Big News Friday. Health and Human Services Secretary Dr. Tom Price resigning amid reports of his use of extensive private charter flights for government business, taxpayer paid for. We want to bring on our panel on that. Ed Rollins is the former White House advisor to President Reagan and a Fox News contributor. Ian Bremmer is with us, president of the Eurasia Group, and it's good to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Right move by the president to tell Tom Price to get going?
Well, the sad part is he lectured him for 2 hours. He should have just told him to go. Price failed miserably as the leader of that department in getting the health care bill through the Congress. Obviously, the flights and all that sort of stuff was sidebar stuff. He was a very respected member of Congress, but could never quite get on top of the job, and it was a very important job.
Well, I guess it's not just all of this use of private planes, but health care.
Well, the bottom line
no
is...
health care, no Obama repeal and replace.
I'm not a big advocate of congressmen, having worked with congressmen, of coming in running a big 80,000-person department. And my sense is he was a very passive player in the health care debate, where I think the plan was for him to go take care of the Congress because he had been a chairman of one of the committees and close to leadership. That didn't happen.
Do we know who's going to take his place at this point?
No, we don't. There's several people in Maine, but
there's a Mike Pence protege,
who's the head of the very important part
Medicaid.
of it. I think the key thing is you need someone who knows the department. There's a lot. Health care is not done yet.
Yeah.
Whether you get us to repeal or not, you've got to run the program as it is today, and you need someone who doesn't have to go in there on a learning curve, someone who can walk in and make it happen.
Let me switch gears, ask about foreign policy, Ian, because Secretary Tillerson is in China, meeting with Chinese officials. Obviously, North Korea top of mind. What can he do at this point to rein in the North?
Look, while everyone is talking about Trump raining fire and fury against the North Koreans, the reality is you have 15 countries at the Security Council, led by the United States, increasing sanctions step by step. The Chinese are absolutely cracking down on smuggling from North Korea into China, and also on joint ventures with the North Koreans, giving them a lot of money. And now Tillerson is also working with the Chinese to try to develop more direct diplomatic negotiations with the North Koreans as well, and has admitted that the Trump administration is in direct contact with the foreign ministry around Kim Jong-un. In other words, despite all the headlines, there's more been accomplished on North Korea by this administration, and largely because Kim Jong-un has been escalating so much, than the prospect of military strikes, which,
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, well, we need it, right? I mean,
does the U.S. economy get impacted if we keep putting pressure on Chinese banks because of North Korea?
The U.S. economy gets impacted if we move from a constructive path with the Chinese, where we're both trying to constrain the North Koreans incrementally, to one where we say, you know what, the Chinese haven't done enough, we've given up, now we're going to start putting our own squeeze on the Chinese directly. We haven't done that yet, and you've had people like Gary Cohn, who you just had on, Wilbur Ross, who have been saying, you know what, we should really be careful before we start putting a lot of tariffs directly on the Chinese. I think the go slow approach is better for the American economy.
It feels like he's had more success on foreign policy than anything else.
I think his foreign policy team is the strongest team he has. I think it's much stronger than his and I think that General Mathis and others who have been in there, I think, have given him good counsel, and I think to a certain extent he respects their counsel, and that's been a very positive thing. There
is a referendum going on in Spain, Catalonia. Tell me about that.
Well, you have hundreds of people that have been injured by the Spanish police. It was illegal to hold this referendum according to the Spanish courts, but what the Prime Minister should have done was ignore it and just let it go on and be symbolic. Instead, he said, I'm going to crack down. Most people that wanted to vote voted anyway, but now the secessionists, the people that want independence in Catalonia, have a much stronger case, and it's one more place in Europe where you're seeing the center not hold. Wow. We've seen it in Brexit. We've seen it with the French, the German elections, and now we're seeing it in Spain.
This is extraordinary, actually. What a story. We'll take a break, and then there's the hurricane response in Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria. The president's war of words with the mayor of San Juan. We'll play you some of that sound and have our panel react to that next on Sunday Morning Futures. Back in a moment.